Dr. Jonathan Latham, Bioscience Research Project, gives us some insight on how the EPA really works.
Well, what I can tell you what happened is basically that the companies were allowed by EPA to produce their own tests, but also the EPA was covering up for this company, right? So EPA basically concealed from the public. They knew about this in 1976, and they kept it basically hidden until the whole thing went to court. And the reason why they kept it hidden was because they wanted to give the companies time to redo the tests. The problem is that the companies knew that the tests were fraudulent, and EPA knew that the tests were fraudulent, right? So so EPA is basically relying at this point on the companies to do the tests. And we also know that many parts of the independent testing laboratory system are also fraudulent, like this new research that you were citing from this German lab, right? What's really interesting about all this is, firstly, there's been a whole bunch of cases that have come to light. But the second interesting thing is that regulators turn a blind eye, right? When we wrote about this German, you probably learned about this German lab from something that we wrote a couple of weeks back. But the most important thing, and maybe I didn't emphasize it enough to me, was that one of the whistleblowers reported this to the regulator, right? They said basically, they told the regulator that this company was submitting fraudulent tests. And guess what? The regulator did nothing, right? So this is a repeating pattern that you have these companies claiming to be independent of the chemical industry, actually fraudulently coming up with tests that show safety when there is no safety. But secondly, that all of this is known to the regulators, right? That they do nothing. Your government does nothing about this. The German government does nothing about this. Other governments do nothing about this. This is what's really interesting about the whole situation to me. And I have a whole understanding of what's going on with these regulators, that basically they're frightened of the industries that they regulate. It's not so much that these industries have basically taken control of them, but these are regulators who are not actually prepared to do their job, right? They never were prepared to do their job. Because think about the EPA in the United States context. The way that the EPA works is that if they wanted to, say, ban glyphosate, they would have to go to the president. They would have to get his approval, because if EPA unilaterally signed a thing saying we're going to ban glyphosate, the president would not support them, right? This is what you have to understand. The president would not support them. And so they have to have the support of the president if they're going to do anything, and they know they're not going to get that. So the whole incentive system in the EPA, when they find fraudulent testing of glyphosate, or they find animal tumors from glyphosate, or they find some kind of health consequence from any pesticide, their total instinct is to bury that information, right? Make sure that no member of the public ever sees that piece of information. And the very best way that you can hide toxicological information from about these synthetic compounds is to make sure that it's done by independent testing labs that are not available to be basically scrutinized through Freedom of Information Act requests. So the EPA, even though it's getting all the time these fraudulent reports from these companies, which they know is fraudulent, and make the clearest possible argument that they should be basically bringing all this testing system in-house. They don't want to bring it in-house because they would then have to, if they found harm, they wouldn't be able to hide it because they're amenable. You can find out what goes on at EPA through Freedom of Information Act requests. And they don't want that, right? They want this to be farmed out to a quote-unquote independent company so that nobody can ever find out, unless there's some brave whistleblower, that these tests are being done fraudulently.
Find podcasts for Smart Health Talk on iHeartRadio or YouTube.